Hey guys, it's Jane. I'm here to do my wrap-up for the end of Chicklitathon. It's the last day in May, and I thought I'd let you know what I've read and how it went. Now, the list of books that I chose for my TBR, I found them by the very simple expedient of going to my library and looking in their chicklit section. So I hadn't actually done any real thinking about what chicklit is and what chicklit isn't. And yet, when I kind of dove into the books, I discovered that a number of them didn't really line up with my ideas of what constitutes a chicklit read. It's one of those, marketing terms, essentially, and yet I feel a bit like I know it when I see it. So I thought I would start this video just running through my ideas of what actually constitutes a chicklit book. And if other people have different ideas, that might be something fun to talk about. Anyway, so to start with, some people I know consider chicklit to be a kind of derogatory term, and they prefer women's fiction or something like that. I don't have any problem with the term chicklit. I personally don't have a problem with the term chick, which I know, again, I mean, it all depends on the intention and the tone and whatever, but, amongst friends, I don't mind anybody referring to me as a chick. I mean, it's informal, certainly. I don't feel it's derogatory. I probably wouldn't class as a chick because I'm like, yeah, I've aged out of that category to a certain extent. But I would much prefer to be, thought of as one of the chicks than one of the girls. I find the whole thing where women are referred to as girls really patronizing and infantilizing. So maybe that's just me. I prefer chick. Let's move on, shall we? Yes, chicklit. So I had this little conversation with my husband, and I initially said I didn't think it needed to be written by a woman. It needed to be written for women, that was really the chicklity part. But on reflection, I think it would be kind of odd for it to be written by a man, but maybe I'm wrong. That's not like a central plank. The more important thing for me is actually that the protagonist in the story is a woman, usually a youngish woman, and by which I don't mean a YA character like a teenager. I mean a youngish woman, typically, in a chicklit book. And there is a romance element to a chicklit story normally, but it normally isn't the predominant thing. It could be an equal partner with something else, but not the main thing. If it's the main thing, then I would say it's a romance story, and not, strictly speaking, a chicklit book. Most chicklit books, as I said, have youngish female protagonists, and I mean, they're not truly coming of age stories, because again, that's usually about, teenagers, but it sort of tends to be about finding one's place in the world. It's also usually a contemporary setting. I would assume a contemporary setting for a chicklit book, and a realistic thing without magic and witchcraft and stuff. There's also a kind of lightness of tone. A chicklit book is an escapist thing. There may be, like political or whatever other sociological issues dealt with, because there often is in fiction, but the overall tone of the piece is light and escapist. So that is what I expect from a chicklit book. An escapist, contemporary set, youngish female protagonist-led story, which has romance, but is kind of sort of about finding one's place in the world. That's what I'm expecting. Not every book that I picked on my list fell into that category. So, and mostly on the whole, I enjoyed the reads. There was one that I DNF'd, but I don't actually think it's a chick lit book, so I'm not feeling at all bad about that as far as my Chicklitathon read goes, but we'll get there. Okay, so the first book that was on my TBR, and I think it was the first one that I read as well, was The Secret Dreamworld of a Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella. Now this is a classic, absolute chick lit book. It's got a youngish protagonist. She is a journalist for a personal finance magazine, and who also, ironically, is in a huge amount of debt because she overspends. And that is the central tension in the story. The fact that she is in this job, which means that she's kind of, you know, by proxy, advising people about finances day in, day out, and yet her own personal finances are in a terrible state, and that is exaggerated in the book. I actually found I kind of enjoyed and didn't enjoy this book at the same time, because the tone is very light and fluffy, and it was exactly what I wanted. It was like, it felt totally like the chick lit book that I was expecting, but this kind of like this constant ominous, like the bank manager wants to talk to you about your overdraft letters that she's getting and ignoring in it. The anxiety that I was kind of feeling over that kind of made it a bit difficult. There's a romantic subplot in this, which is unrealistic in the extreme. There is, you know, a multi-millionaire who falls in love with her, of course, and at one point I thought she was going to get out of her, you know, mess, her extreme mess that she got herself into by virtue of this man, and I thought that was not, I wasn't going to be happy about that, but she does manage to get out of her hole that she's dug herself into, and not merely by virtue of dating a really rich man. So the ending was fine, but yes, as I said, that kind of anxiety about the terrible, terrible financial decisions that she was making throughout the story did kind of eat at me while I was reading it. But it was exactly what it said on the tin. It was a very enjoyable read. The second book that was on my list, Standard Deviation by Katherine Heiney. That's the one that I DNF'd. Actually, it was not at all a chick lit book. It's not told from a female perspective. It's a female author, but the protagonist is a man. So it was all told from this sort of very privileged, like upper middle class, wealthy male, but you know, my life is kind of out of control because of all of these women sort of situation, like protagonist, and I really wasn't enjoying it. So we didn't read that one to the end. 666 Park Avenue was a fun read, but I don't know that I would shelve it as chick lit, because really and truly it is like a fantasy story. It's like about witchcraft, and our protagonist has fallen in love with this dude. She's from provincial France, and she gets on a plane to go with him to Manhattan to live his wonderful, expensive life, and it turns out she's a witch, but nobody's ever told her, and also his family are witches, and there's witch wars going on, and yeah, it was kind of like a dynasty with witches or something, and not super chick-litty, but hey, it was escapist and enjoyable, so yeah, that's all good. Not Meeting Mr. Right by Anita Heiss is the next one on my list. Anita Heiss is an Aboriginal woman, and this is the second one of her chick lit books that I've read, and I kind of didn't 100% love the first one that I read a few years ago. This one I kind of found even less enjoyable, which I find very, very sad to say, especially, you know, during Reconciliation Week this week, woohoo. But what can I do? I didn't enjoy the story. So I assume I'm not the target audience for this story, so that's not like a problem. It's just what it is. So it's one of those, she goes to her 10-year high school reunion, and all of the people from her year at this sort of posh Catholic girls' school that she'd been to were all married with kids, basically, except for her. And she's like, going into it, she's very bolshy about that. She didn't care that she didn't have a man and whatever, and and she was having this fabulous single life, and all of her friends were like, bogged down with kids. But then after the event, she's like, no, like I'm 12 months and I'm going to find Mr. Right and I'm going to get married and I'm going to show that you can like have it all. You can have it all. You can have a fabulous life and do all the things you want to do and have the relationship. And so she kind of does this thing where she calls a lot of friends together and they make a strategy, and she goes on all these blind dates and et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of just didn't relate so much. So yeah, there was that. The next one on my list, Jane Austen Ruined My Life by Beth Pattillo. I really enjoyed this one. It is a very gentle, classic chick lit setup. So there's a youngish woman who married the love of her life. She's an English professor, and her husband was an even more high-powered English professor. Everything in her garden is rosy until one day she walks in and finds her husband on the kitchen table having it away with her teaching assistant. And so not only is her marriage kind of kaput, then her teaching assistant makes a claim of plagiarism against her, and she loses her job. And that part of it I kind of found like stretching the boundaries of disbelief a little. She's lost her career, she's lost her marriage, she's lost her kind of professional kind of reputation. But there was a letter that she received. She was a Jane Austen scholar. That's where the Jane Austen from the title comes from. She had just received a letter from this mysterious sort of woman in England inviting her to come and see her, and hinting that she may have in her possession some heretofore unpublished Jane Austen letters. Needing to do something and not really having much else on, she comes to London to stay at a girlfriend's flat in London and look up this woman and see if there's anything that she can salvage. And she thinks if she can actually find a cache of previously unpublished Jane Austen letters, it might go some way to rehabilitate her career, essentially. But it's more than that, and there's this kind of Jane Austen conspiracy, and there is a fellow from her past who is also staying at the same place, at the same friend's place in London, and she, they hadn't seen each other since our Emma, our main character, was married, but there's kind of been there was a sort of will they won't they between them years earlier. And so we've got romantic intrigue, and we've got like crazy Jane Austen conspiracy whatevers, and it was quite gentle, and I actually kind of enjoyed the ending. There's a lot of people on Goodreads who said they didn't like the ending. I quite enjoyed the ending, and it was an escapist piece of fluff that I quite enjoyed. I also love the fact that her husband gets his comeuppance at some point during the laying out of the book. So yeah, yay. I didn't read Standard Deviations at the end. That was to be my serious one. But in fact, the book that I'd chosen for music, Cherry Bomb by Jenny Valentish, is actually, I would say, less a chick lit, more a women's fiction sort of read. It's a bit more of a serious chick lit book at any rate. So this one's set in Australia, follows a young woman, probably younger than I would expect for a chick lit, but she is like old for her years, who is in a kind of rock band with her cousin. The two of them are kind of the lead singers of this rock band, and it does the classic opening of one of these stories where we have a prologue, which is sort of towards the end of the story, of a really big concert with the two of them in, but everything kind of going bad. And that's sort of the prologue, and we get a glimpse of that. And then we go back in time and sort of follow their rise. They started playing together, I think, when they were about 16. They have an aunt who was, in her day, a really big pop star in Australia, and so a lot of her connections have meant that these two have been able to kind of piggyback through some of the process. And it's also set not right now, but a few years ago, just long enough ago that it's kind of vaguely kind of conceivable that there is the kind of industry that we're talking about, because of course the professional music industry is basically imploded, and there doesn't seem to be money to be made of almost anybody who isn't Beyonce anymore. But this is set just a few years ago when there was still record sales, and yeah, I really enjoyed this story. It's basically about this girl who was very damaged as a child and is acted out in lots of ways, finding her own voice. So that classic kind of chick-lit sort of theme of, you know, finding your place in the world is kind of, but it's in a much more minor key than a standard fluffy chick-lit book. But I really enjoyed it. The last one that I have to talk about is Austenistan, which was a collection of short stories. I actually live tweeted about this when I was reading it earlier this week. About half of these I found to be Austenish and chick-lit-ish and enjoyable-ish, like fitting all the things that I was expecting. There was one that I thought was really good. It has a Caroline Bingley-esque character and it sort of plays after the Lizzie Darcy relationship is done. And it's sort of looking at what happens to her afterwards, which is not a question I'd ever spend any time thinking about, but it was done really nicely. I thought that was a really nice story and well kind of put together. There are 3 stories at the end of the collection that don't seem to have any obvious connection to the Austen books. All the other ones I could like immediately pick, oh, this is Emma, this is Lady Susan, this is Pride and Prejudice. But yes, there wasn't a Sense and Sensibility one, there wasn't a Persuasion one, and there were these 3 at the end that were just, I'm not even really sure what they were doing in the collection. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, but nevertheless enjoyable for what it was. So that was a nice way to finish out my Chicklitathon. I've talked for a very long time and I have to stop now. I'd love to hear if anybody else took part in Chicklitathon, what they read, what was good. If you've got different ideas about the definition of chicklit, I'd love to hear about that as well. And if anybody's read any of these books, I'd also love to hear what you thought about them. Anyway, that's it for me today. I hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!